Marketing podcast is brought to you by me, Amanda Bear. We'll talk about topics that you don't normally read about in marketing literature that tell you more about the what, but not the how of marketing in the real world. You'll hear great conversations with leaders and up-and-comers who intersect with marketing and have been testing and learning and paving the way every day. Visit futurefitmarketing.com.au for access to resources and past episodes. It's generally commonplace now for businesses to work with an agency or freelance roster. Whether it's on a retained relationship for larger businesses for strategy, technology integrations, crisis communications, or just ad hoc projects for creative development, for example. For startup and scale-up businesses, it's an extra pair of eyes and hands to be able to pick up work that small teams just can't manage to scale or have the expertise to do on their own. I've heard many frustrations both from client side and agencies. Brands find that agencies don't have the same commitment to delivering on the needs of the business, miss deadlines, go over budget, don't get the customer or the nuance of the brand. Agencies don't always get the transparency of the business metrics, feel siloed, and are not really part of the team, so how can they be expected to deliver in the same way as an in-house team does? So how can we bridge the gap? What's the secret sauce to building the optimal and high-performing client agency team to deliver on ROI and the best work? I speak to Alex Leahy, an account director at M&C Saatchi Melbourne, who's experienced in leading and delivering fully integrated campaigns across a broad range of clients. She's worked on both local and international award-winning campaigns, including leading and executing the Cannes Line winning work for AAMI Warning Spots and Rest Towns initiatives. I am so excited to have Alex Leahy in our latest episode of Future Fit Marketing podcast. Now, Alex is a really strong up-and-comer and has built a lot of direct client relationships, and I'm keen to pick her brain. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really flattered to be here and it's great to chat.
Really keen to hear from you about your experience, the types of clients that you've been working with. Why don't you let us know a bit about your background?
Yeah, well, like you said, so I have been at M&C for just over a year now, about a year and a half. And before that, I was at Ogilvy, and I actually started at Ogilvy. So I was there for about 5 years. And my main client while working at Ogilvy was Amy Insurance, which was amazing, great clients, really great work, quite strategic, really interesting. And I was very lucky to work on the whole business. So a lot of brand and integrated campaigns, but also we did their one-to-one and also their content. So there's a real breadth of experience, which was great to learn on. And I worked on them for maybe 4 years, so the most part of while I was there. And then kind of in between that, I also worked on some retail. So Ogilvy used to work with Priceline Pharmacy, which was really interesting and quite a different category to insurance. So nice to kind of break it up and do something different. And on top of that, I also used to work on Mini. So Ogilvy used to run the BMW and Mini accounts. So there was a small team of us that used to just work on the Mini above the line comms. So had some experience there as well. So a bit of a stretch, but definitely financial services was my main client. And then I decided to have a bit of a change and move to M&C last year, and have been working on Origin Energy, which has been really interesting, and also coincidentally Higher Up, which I work with you on, which has also been just amazing and really interesting and such a different category, and just really great to learn about a category that I really didn't know much about or have much experience with, and something quite different to Origin as well, and really interesting kind of challenges there. So I've been really lucky, and I've worked at 2 really great agencies and had some amazing mentors. So far it's been pretty awesome.
It sounds like you've had quite a breadth of some clients and businesses that you've worked with. Can you talk through a few of the challenges that they've come to you with?
Yeah, well, I think at the moment it's quite interesting because Origin and higher up, it's both challenges but very different. Origin is at a really interesting time, just generally in the market. Like energy is really top of mind, which isn't normally the case. People don't really think about their energy; they just go to switch on the lights and it's on or it's not on, and then you pay your bill, and that's really all the experience that you have with your energy provider. But recently, it's really been in the news. People are really worried about the bills going up, and also even things like reliability, which is normally never a concern for people. Talk of blackouts. So it's a really interesting time. And then that's all happening while there's a major energy transition going on, this shift to renewable energy. So they're in this kind of interesting phase where they're trying to balance providing kind of value for customers now and ensuring reliability of supply. But then also on top of that, there's a real future focus of where are we going? Can we make sure that we're transitioning to renewables? And Origin are really committed to doing that. But it's a very interesting balance of the reliability right now, but also moving towards cleaner energy.
I love that you're translating some of the business problems. I'm really curious, and this is probably not just a question for you, but the breadth of agencies. When you're working with a client that is in a category that you're passionate about, I think it's super easy to get excited. If it's something that you're not, how do you get yourself excited?
Yeah, and it's a good point because the most of my clients I've worked on is insurance and energy, which no one
Mm-hmm.
really cares about. I think if you as you work with clients who are really passionate about the work, like Amy's work is really fun. They've built a really strong brand. They've got amazing storytelling. So even though the product itself people might find boring, the way you communicate that is really interesting and fun. And Origin's tried to do that too with their new platform, is just kind of breaking away from the competition and looking and feeling quite different. So that's probably a main thing. And then the other thing is, I know it sounds boring, but particularly things like energy and insurance, they're actually really complicated once you get into the nitty gritty of kind of how it works. And although on the surface level, you're kind of like, oh, I don't really care about that, when you get into it and you start to understand what the clients are working with, what the business challenges are, it can actually be really interesting. And then it's quite meaty challenges to try and kind of unpick. I find it more interesting than I'm not a big FMCG fan. And I think that's just
Mm-hmm.
because I've always loved working on clients where it feels like you've got to make more of an effort to get consumers engaged.
Now I'm gonna turn to something a little bit more practical now,
Mhm.
where obviously you work through an agreement, you're negotiating with a client when you've done your pitch, etc. You've established your SLAs, your scope of works, your deliverables. Scopes potentially change.
Mhm.
It must be super frustrating. How do you cope with that? How do you work with the client to get to the right sort of outcomes?
Yeah, it can be hard because I think at the sort of pitch process and when you're pulling together a scope, you are working a little bit with hypotheticals because you don't know exactly what you're going to execute. Maybe you don't know the media plan. So you are kind of using past experiences to put together, like, I guess, an estimate or a recommendation of, roughly we need X amount of money to execute. But as you go, obviously things always change. It's the way it works. Things are never always straight and
Mm-hmm.
easy in advertising. I think it's a case by case basis, and I think there's a bit of understanding of if it's a small change in scope. I think there's a bit of a give and take of if we feel like we can sort of fit it, it's like for the greater good of the relationship rather than, conversations about finance can be really tricky. So if we feel like, look, it's really minor in the scheme of things and we feel like it's a strong ongoing relationship, I don't think it's worth bringing it up and making it a big conversation. But if we feel like, for example, we were only going to do press and now we're doing a full integrated campaign, there's a TV ad, we're doing out of home rollout, there probably then just needs to be an honest conversation around, look, this is where we were sitting, but now with all of this, it looks like we need X amount more. can we make that work, or how could we, is there efficiencies that we can make in other parts in order to try and achieve as much as we can with whatever your max budget is. So I think it's just having an honest conversation and keeping the communication really open.
If I reflect on the client side as well, part is potentially scope creep. And when you think about cost blowouts, it's a real frustration point on the client side as well. But half of it, it's a two-way street, right? So half of it is potentially we're asking much more than the expectation already set. How do you have those difficult conversations?
Yeah, it is hard. And I think for me as well, at my level, it's recognizing sometimes if I need to pull in someone like Jane, who's the head of business management, to kind of support me in those conversations. And then I think it's just having either an in-person meeting or a Zoom, and just having the facts in front of you, I think always helps. Helps me prepare as well to say sort of, this is where we were and this was the amount, and now it looks like we're sitting here, so that you're working in facts rather than just kind of opinions. I think it makes it easier. And then I think it's just being honest and saying, if there was a lack of communication on our side potentially, which sometimes can happen where agencies aren't transparent enough earlier on about potentially it's going to cost X amount down the line. And then just having that conversation and hopefully coming to some sort of solution that works for both parties.
Now, I think on the client side, sometimes there's clients that can't always be transparent around profitability, the business strategy, overarching metrics and things like that outside of the marketing metrics. One, does that really frustrate you? And two, how do you overcome things when you don't have the full picture of the business?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't say frustrate, but it does definitely make things harder. I think because we want to be trying to create as effective work as we can. And if we don't have some understanding, there's a lot of we understand that you won't be able to share everything with us. But I think if we have some understanding of the business context and the strategy and where we're going, it really helps us kind of make sure that the strategy we're forming and then the work we create is going to be effective. And then when we come to the end, when we're analyzing that work and saying, okay, did it perform? Did it work? We can actually ladder that back up to kind of what the strategy and the business context is that we were provided with. So it's less of a frustration and more of it definitely makes things more difficult.
You've had the spectrum of relationships, and I want to understand what good, bad and ugly looks like. Maybe let's start with the bad and ugly. Tell me about a difficult partnership, what that looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think on the whole have been pretty lucky. And I think that's been the clients that I've worked with and also the agencies that I've worked at have really respected and tried to build this strong partnership with their clients. So if you kind of learn from that, you're always going to pick up on that, and that's something that you're always going to strive to do as well. And then on the other side, I've been really lucky that my clients have just been really lovely and open and willing to kind of form that partnership. But there definitely are instances where I think a lot of it comes to where the communication breaks down, and potentially if you are, you're presenting strategy and creative and you feel a little bit like you're going in circles, and I'm sure you've been in this situation too where we're presenting and then, we're getting feedback and we're going again and again and we just don't seem to be getting there. And I think a part of that is that maybe we're not listening, or maybe we aren't getting the full information or clear feedback that we need in order to take it to the right direction. I think that can cause a bit of tension on both sides because, of course, it can be frustrating for both parties. Everyone's human. And I think that's where the cracks can kind of start to show, is where the clients feel like we're not listening to them. And then on the other side, we feel like, oh, why aren't they buying what we're giving them? We feel like it's right. So it can be, that's where I feel like is the biggest kind of cause for tension and sometimes a breakdown in the relationship, is those kind of situations, which can be quite hard to fix too.
Yeah, look, I think they're good challenges, but you've been very pragmatic in sort of saying, yep, big relationships, you can iron them out. So tell me on the flip side then, what does good look like?
When you feel like, and I've had a few clients sort of come to us and say this, is when you feel like you're on the same team, when you feel like you are almost an extension of the marketing team, or they feel like we're an extension of them. So I think when you're really aligned and you can then, because you have that kind of that trust, and that sense of partnership, you can be really honest. So if there are those moments where we're not getting there or we need more from you, you can have an honest conversation and it's completely respectful, and both sides kind of respect the other's expertise. And I think that's where we then can make our best work, and the creatives feel most kind of passionate and inspired is when they feel like, the clients really trust us for what we can bring to them. So we enjoy working on it. And then I think the outcome is better work for everyone.
So practically speaking, how does a client and agency get to that sort of relationship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I found like on a more personal level with just my day-to-day clients, it's almost like taking it away from because there is this constant churn of you're always trying to get something out the door, you're always on to the next thing. There's such a focus on delivering and just getting to that deadline and getting the work out the door. There needs to be space and time, and it can be really hard to have one-on-one conversations, and maybe it's just a Zoom or you go for coffee and you just sit there for an hour and you just chat about, what are you going through? What's happening in the business? Like, how's work for you? What have you been finding hard? What are you liking about working with us? So it's less about specific projects or tasks, and it's more about the relationship as a whole. And I think that helps to build a bit of a friendship in a way. And then they feel more that they can trust you and they're listening to you. So then when you come to them with work, I feel like they think that we understand them a little bit better.
So clearly forging a partnership where you can understand the nuances, the insight sort of outside of the actual scope of work and that bond is quite important. Look, let's be honest, you can't always get along with everyone.
No.
And so there's probably some preferences over the others. If there are sort of tensions where you maybe don't see eye to eye with someone, do you go out of your way to actually try to forge a friendship, or how does that kind of happen?
Yeah, I think a bit of it is that, because I guess as well, if they're a new client, they don't know you and you don't know them, you're starting to forge that relationship, but they obviously don't trust you yet, which is completely understandable. You haven't delivered anything yet, who knows? So I think it's just partly is making it kind of going out of your way to kind of forge that partnership. But also I think from our end, it's almost getting a few runs on the board, like showing to that client that, okay, we can deliver. We did that in, if something was due really quickly, we've done that for you. We've got a few campaigns out the door. You can see the way that we work and that we've got your back. I think that kind of builds that trust as well, because then, well, hopefully clients sort of say, oh, yep, okay, great. It seems like they really have our best interests at heart and they're really working for us and, putting all their effort into everything. I think it's a bit of a showing that you can do the work, and then on top of that, trying to forge a bit more of a personal bond as well.
So tell me, anyone looking at your role, tell me honestly, what are the shitty parts?
Yeah, I think one thing that you kind of have to be honest about is that advertising it can be really long hours and it can be quite stressful. And I think some of it is, for example, if timings are really tight and you've got no money, and then there's kind of conversations about finance and, are we going to go over budget, can be really stressful and put a lot of pressure on you and also everyone else that you work with. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about, I really love it, but being in account management is that you are kind of a middleman of, you obviously are the advocate for the client in the agency. So you're the one that knows the client best. You have all the information. But then on the flip side, you also want to make sure that the creatives know that you are on their team as well, and that, where appropriate, you'll fight for the creative work if it's right. So it's this interesting juggling, balancing act of, if you get feedback from a client, you have to then take that to the creatives, and it's not always great feedback. And kind of making sure that you still keep that friendship and that partnership with the creatives, as well as also balancing the interests of the client, can be really hard at times. And it's always a dynamic that I think you're constantly kind of juggling, and depends on the project and the client. But I think it's just keeping in mind that it's not just the relationships with the clients that you have to maintain and build, but it's also with everyone else internally as well.
It sounds like you need a certain type of personality and resilience to manage that. On the flip side, what about the good stuff?
Yeah, I think the amazing thing, and everyone always says this, but I think it's probably because it's true, is the people. Not just the people that you work with in agencies, because you meet really interesting, creative people, designers, art directors, copywriters, strategists. Like you work with a lot of people that think quite differently to you, which I find great because it kind of opens your eyes to kind of how other people work. And then on top of that, I really love developing really strong relationship with clients. I just find it really rewarding. And when you feel like you can walk, I had a client a few months ago, we went for coffee, and then she said afterwards, feels like I just had coffee with my friend. And it just makes you think, actually, it's all really worth it, and it's so rewarding. That's definitely the main thing, is the people.
The last couple of questions I want to ask you is, this whole premise of the podcast is about being future fit. Is there any advice you give to our listeners on how you stay future fit?
It's really interesting because I work quite a lot. I find that in my downtime, I sometimes just want to completely switch off, and I don't want to think about work, which is hard because you're watching TV, or, you're on YouTube, and then you see ads, and suddenly your brain goes, that wasn't very good. Or
No.
What are they trying to achieve there? I'm not really sure. Or you go, oh, wow, that was amazing. I've got to save it. So actually I find downtime and switching off from work the biggest help to then make me my best self at work. So I find that when I read, fiction. When I listen to podcasts, I mostly listen to like trashy gossip podcasts, just because I find it then makes me feel really refreshed. And then I think it also, like, we don't operate in a vacuum. Advertising just doesn't live in this bubble. We're trying to reflect culture and understand culture. So in a way, I think it's work, but it's just, having that time that's away from my job, because it can be so stressful and full on, I think really helps me then perform my best and be kind of excited to come back to work.
Last question for you is around any resources, books, podcasts that you would recommend to the listeners that might help them to be future fit?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. And it's kind of an old book now, and it's not just specific to marketing comms. It's probably just more general for anyone that's in business, and also probably more specifically women. But I read Jamila Rizvi's book a few years ago that was called Not Just Lucky, which was really interesting, and I think really helped me kind of work through this feeling of like imposter syndrome, where you always have, and it's in the title of the book, you always have this kind of reaction or feeling to say, well, I'm just lucky, or I got lucky to get that promotion, or I was in the right place at the right time to get that opportunity or to do that presentation. And I think it just really helped me reframe to remind yourself that no, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. Don't just say, oh, it's luck for me to be here. And it also gave some really interesting tools on, how to ask for a raise or a promotion, or, how to tackle that big presentation and sort of stop having those feelings of self-doubt. So it was really interesting. And I honestly think I probably need to read it again, because it's just a good reminder sometimes, and a bit of a confidence boost as well.
Thank you, Alex. That was really insightful. Loved hearing your stories and your opinion. Definitely at the coalface. Look forward to seeing your up and coming career. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me on.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, Share this podcast series with someone else, and thanks for paying it forward.